Hey everyone, Mr. Fortin here at the end of your lesson, your first lesson of the algebra textbook. So hopefully it went well with your groups. If not, you'll get a lot more practice, and you can always reach out to us if you have any questions. I wanted to jump in here because the very first section of the textbook actually featured some functions that look like this. So you kind of had to work with your group and make sense of this. And maybe some of the people in your group have seen this, other people haven't. That's kind of one of the benefits of working with a group, is you can learn from each other. But anyways, this was called an absolute value function. This is an absolute value function right here. So you had to know what these bars, right? The thing that makes an absolute value function or absolute value is the fact that they have these bars here. This is called absolute value notation. And because it's kind of, it was sort of testing if you've seen this before and getting some practice with it if you have, because you probably haven't done a ton of absolute value problems. Because of that, they actually had down below on sort of page 2 of our textbook, they actually have the notes for absolute value down below them. So I wanted you to draw your attention to this here because I want you to get used to reading these things. These things are called math notes, and they're going to be sort of scattered throughout the textbook. Normally you'll do a lesson and then maybe, not every time, but maybe sometimes they'll have some math notes right afterwards. And it's certainly worth reading because it's all kind of stuff you've already done before, right? This lesson had absolute value. So if you read about it, you get a sense, do I actually know this? Is this something that I need to work harder on or ask questions on? So anyways, just wanted to make sure you guys got this here, that the definition of absolute value is actually given to you in the textbook. And I kind of want to recommend whenever you reach any of these methods and meanings, math note sections, that you do exactly what it's saying here. You take a little bit of notes with it here. So what we're going to do today to sort of wrap up this lesson is we're going to take some notes on absolute value and just sort of read through this right here. And then we'll wrap things up and you can get on your merry way here. Okie dokie. So let's go ahead and read through it together and figure out what we need to write down in our notebooks, of course. So absolute value represents the numerical value of a number without regard to its sign. Very nice there. This textbook gave this to us in bold. That means they're giving us a definition, right? A definition or their best description here. So if it's a definition, if it's in bold, then it's worth just kind of copying word for word what they have there kind of in the textbook. So that's what I'll do right now. So absolute value represents the numerical value of a number without regard to its sign. So we know sign has something to do with it. We know positive and negatives have something to do with it. We'll get more practice soon if you're having trouble with this here. But step 1, right, whenever you get to a definition in a textbook, just write it down. Just put it in your notes. You've done the problems today, and hopefully your problems are in your notebooks. And then when you get to a definition, just write it down. Maybe you highlight it later just to know that we got this definition, this chapter. I need to be responsible for this definition if I have a chapter test coming up here. Okay, we saw the definition in bold. We went ahead and just write it down just to make sure we understand what it means. We'll read it again. The numerical value of a number without regard to its sign. So every number has a sign, and signs are what? Positive sign or negative sign. So they're either on either side of the zero. A number, any numbers on either side of this zero here. It could be on the positive side, could be on the negative side, unless it's that number 0. So the number 0 actually has an absolute value of 0. So it comes up a little bit later here is that since this is always positive, absolute value is always either a positive value or 0. So that means 0's absolute value is 0, but positive 3's absolute value is 3. And negative 3's absolute value, right? So if negative 3, without regard to its sign, we would say that its absolute value is positive 3. So you may have heard it explained before in the past that an absolute value of a number is just the equivalent positive value of that number. So if it's positive, the absolute value is the same number positive, and if it's negative, it is the same number but positive. That's basically the same thing here. Okay, so what you need to be on the lookout for absolute values is this symbol right here, the vertical bars. The symbol for absolute value is 2 vertical bars. So I'm going to do this here because any number has an absolute value, so I'm going to put a variable in here. This is x here. X can be referred to as a variable, which just represents any number. Any number that we're aware of, we could drop in for x here. And if it has absolute value bars outside of x here, we would know it's what? Either 0 if x is 0 or a positive number, the opposite of the number if it were negative, and the same number if it were positive here. So if we are thinking about reading the math, right, one thing you'll do this year for sure is reading the math here. If I have an absolute value, my absolute value bars here, and x in the middle, this would be pronounced as the absolute value of x. Okay, so here we talk about the 2 bars together. We say the absolute value, and then whatever else is in the expression in the middle, we say it's of that. So bars means the absolute value, of whatever in the middle, which is x right now. So let's look at this within the context of actual numbers right here and get a little more complicated down here. Just a few examples. How would we say this in words? Say it along with me. Have some fun. This is the absolute value. It's the absolute value bar. So this means the absolute value of -3. And what's our answer here, right? Absolute value -3. Well, -3 is actually 3 distance away from 0. So because distance is always positive, that's one way that a lot of people think of absolute value is we take a number and then some books will actually define it like this, that we take a number and then the absolute value of that number is that number's distance from 0 on the number line. So the number -3 right here would have an absolute value of +3 because it's 3 away from 0. So there's your answer in this one. Absolute value of -3 equals 3. What about 5 here? 5 is my second example. 5. Well, 5 is also 5 away from 0. Okay, 5 was 0. So we'd have to take away 5 to get to 0. But the idea is going from 0 to get us to that point would be 5 in distance here. So even though here the signs change, this one here, +5 here. So we want to look at that with no respect to sign at all. So we just ignore signs. That means we're considering this a +5 value. Okay, a little bit more complicated down here. How would we pronounce this actually using words here? So again, use this, what I wrote here in green to help you think about how I'd pronounce this into words here. So here in math, you actually read things. So how do you read books? Like, which way do you read books when you read it? Like when you get to a new sentence, where do you look at? Do you look at the period at the end? Do you look at the commas in the middle? Or how do you read a sentence? Where do you look in a book? Well, if I'm going to read a sentence, I'm going to look on the left side. My teacher was saying, hey, read these math notes. I would look up here and read from left to right. The absolute value represents the numerical value of a number without regard to its sign. So with math, you read left to right. Okay, that might seem obvious, but it gets useful for a problem like this because what this translates to in terms of this math sentence is the negative of the absolute value of -6. So notice here I said the absolute value of. So the negative of the absolute value of -6 equals. And if you think about that, I think you kind of get a sense of what the order of operations kind of has to be in a problem like this. We're looking for the negative of the absolute value of -6. So what we actually have to do first is we have to take this into consideration first. We're looking for the negative of the absolute value of -6. So in fact, absolute value is actually just one way of grouping numbers, right? When we see bars like this, it's kind of like parentheses, right? Kind of like parentheses, in that you have to deal with the parentheses first before you do other operations on the outside. Anyways, I'm getting kind of ahead of myself here. That'll be another video that other teachers are making, which is order of operations. But for absolute value, try to follow my logic here. We're looking for the negative of the absolute value of -6. And we know that -6 has what absolute value? +6, okay, +6 here. So this whole thing becomes +6, but wait, what did we leave on the outside? We left a negative on the outside. So when you're evaluating negative values, what I recommend is when you take the absolute value of something, so we have to take the absolute value first, right? Took the absolute value of -6, and we know that -6's absolute value is +6. So I'm going to change this to a +6, but I'm going to put parentheses on the outside so that if there's anything else in this expression on the outside of the absolute value bars, now it comes down here as well. So here, -6 equals, well, sorry, +6, right? Because the absolute value of is +6. It equals -6 here. Finally, last one we can get to is this. Reading from left to right. We can read it from left to right again along with me here. We're looking at 3 minus the absolute value of -15 is equal to, well, 3 minus the absolute value of -15. Sounds like we need to subtract the absolute value of -15. So again, what we need to start with is dealing with the absolute value first. You deal with, just like you deal with parentheses first. So for those of you who've heard PEMDAS, right, parentheses, the front P, absolute value is part of that, right? The absolute value is also a way of grouping numbers together. So anyways, 3 minus the absolute value of -15 would get us to, well, an absolute value of -15 is +15. And here we have 3 minus 15. So if we're on 3 on the number line, we take away 15. We're going to take away 3 of the 15, take away another 12, right? To get us taking away 15 here, and we get -12 as our answer right here. Okay, so I'd recommend, if I were you, getting your notes down. We've got some notes for you to write down, a sentence here, the definition of what to look out for the symbols that tell us that something's the absolute value of, that you read it from left to right, just to recap all that stuff you should know and have written down in your notebooks, and then some more for you guys to try right now. So try these 3 problems out. You'll have some similar problems on your homework tonight, and hopefully this video was useful. I will see you guys around a little bit later. Stay tuned for the answers too. Good luck.